Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support. Thanks for everything that you're sending my way, the show's way. All the messages that I get from you are just awesome, and I encourage you, keep those coming. Love hearing from you guys. Love talking hoops and coaching with you guys on a personal level. Today is kind of a unique topic and kind of a really fun topic where with my guest, we're going to kind of get into the idea of when you have a talented team, when you have guys or girls who have the ability to be really successful. If you have a whole team of them, what's the process of getting them all to be, playmakers, getting them all to be successful and thrive in their positions, so that it's not just one or two players who have, all of the ability or all of the attention, and defenses can zero in on them, so to speak, but to build rather something where everyone has the ability to make plays and be successful with the ball, without the ball. And that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to get into what kind of goes into making all of the players on your court playmakers, viable options, and being successful regardless of what it is that you run on the court. So we're going to jump into that right now. As always, I don't do this alone. Very happy to be joined by a coach out at Rangeview High School. Very happy to be joined tonight by Coach Shawn Palmer. Coach, really appreciate you being able to come on here and talk to us, like I said before we started recording, especially because you just came back from a game yourself. So appreciate it, Coach, for you being able to come on here and chat. How are we doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk basketball with you, and I've been a fan of your podcast and listen quite a few times. So this should be fun.
Awesome, Coach. Appreciate that. Let's start with you. As I start with every guest, Coach, let's start with an introduction to you and your basketball journey and your coaching journey, and tell us where your coaching journey has taken you, and ultimately how did you end up at Rangeview?
Yeah. I'll try to give the abbreviated abbreviated version, but I grew up son of a coach. My dad coached me in high school. He was a former college coach, and so actually my first coaching experience was when I was a junior and senior in high school here in Colorado, and I helped him coach the middle school team. We were in a K-12 school, so that was kind of indoctrinated in coaching, and had a fun high school basketball career, and got to play a little bit in college in the school in Minnesota called Northwestern College in St. Paul, and learned a lot through both experiences, but actually coached a little bit youth basketball while I was in college for an organization called Urban Stars out of Minneapolis. Enjoyed that experience and just kept the fever for coaching and the excitement and wanting to learn, and got to coach at Blaine High School in a suburb of Minneapolis in Minnesota for a year, and then made our way back to Colorado, and got to have an experience at Colorado Christian University. Was a volunteer assistant there, and enjoyed and learned a ton from my experience in coaching college, and actually coached for a guy named Brandon Hayes, who was a disciple of Mike Dunlap, who's been a real successful coach at a lot of different levels. But that kind of opportunity and experience was a blessing, but it also kind of led me to understand and appreciate coaching high school basketball. I knew that was kind of my fit and my gig. And that led me to teaching and coaching at Rangeview High School. Got to coach with a legend out here in Colorado named Terry Taylor for a year. And Terry actually just got put into the Colorado High School Coaching Hall of Fame in Colorado. So that's pretty exciting this past summer. And then coached 1 year at junior varsity at Rangeview with Terry. And that was 2002. Been there ever since. I've been the varsity coach since 2003. So I've been blessed to coach a lot of really good players and coached against a lot of really good coaches. And here I am today.
I'm really curious, Coach, with your experience that you've had, and especially as you just mentioned, with how long that you've been, particularly at Rangeview. How have you kind of noticed the game evolve and change over your 20 years? Have you kind of felt like the shift in the way that the game is played? And if you have, how did you have to kind of adapt or maybe change your coaching style as the years have gone by?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think the game has changed. And sometimes I'll go back and I'll watch I'll watch a game maybe from years past, and trying to when we have teams that maybe remind me of teams that I had even like 10, 15 years ago, and watch those games. You do notice it, and sometimes you just kind of get into the motion of the next year's team, and you don't really realize the contrast. But it's definitely a little more of an open game, even at the high school level, where kids are shooting a lot of threes and playing in transition a little bit more. It's definitely changed from kind of your traditional motion offense, although still see teams run that. And it's a fun game to watch, and I enjoy it. And I enjoy the changes. And it's kind of, coaching high school, you kind of have to adapt to what's different and what's new, and the from the player development piece, or just kind of how the game is played. You definitely see those changes, and I think it's been for the better.
Yeah, that's great. I love hearing like the positive attitude towards it, right? Sometimes the game changes and we're like, I like the way that it was, or oh no, like all this is happening and it's forcing me to change everything. But I think it's always good to have a good like positive attitude and know that, as the game evolves and changes and grows, like it's more of an opportunity for you as a coach to kind of expand your own coaching repertoire and your own coaching
Yeah,
knowledge. And I think it just gives you another opportunity to kind of learn the game or maybe see the game in a different, light or in a different way or see it played in a different way. And I don't know, to me that's pretty exciting. It sounds like that's kind of your mentality as well.
100%. You got to evolve as a coach as well, right? We have to grow just like we're asking our kids to grow.
Hmm. Coach, I know that for many listeners and many coaches in general, the word culture, it's such a interesting word with so many different definitions and phrases, and some love the term, some kind of roll their eyes at the term, but I think it's just a good kind of catch-all term, and everyone kind of has an idea as to what that term means or can give their own kind of definition to it. So I wanted to ask you, Coach, about the culture at Rangeview. I want to talk about with you. How would you describe what the culture is like for the basketball program at Rangeview, and how, I guess, did it get established, and then also how have you kind of maintained it throughout all of your years there as well?
That's a great question, and one that it's always worth looking into and kind of comparing and finding ways to improve. And but I would say early on, as a coach, I really wanted credibility. As a young coach, I felt like maybe if I could win, I could establish some respect from my players or coaching peers, and so I was just seeking that credibility constantly. And I think the more that I've learned and seen the success and failures and the peaks and valleys of both with our teams and with other teams, you change to really focusing on team building. You change for seeking that, how do I teach these guys how to be servant leaders for each other? And if you can establish that kind of vibe, that culture where kids really do learn how to be the best teammate they can, they really do learn and enjoy being a part of a team, then the winning kind of takes care of itself, right? And it's
Hmm.
not the main focus, but it is the outcome of having a great culture. And like basketball, like so many other sports, so often it's the teams with the most talent do win a lot of times.
Right.
Uh, but I think, to get the best out of a certain group, and I think basketball is such a great kind of medium and um, example of that is you have to have a good locker room. You have to have a good culture and experience and environment for your practices, for your games, for your program to get the maximum best out of your teams and your players.
Yeah, it's I think one of the things that you probably can draw on too, having, as much experience as you have, is that you can kind of zoom out and kind of, maybe really look at big picture and kind of see, that you can't necessarily live and die, by each game or things like that. You're kind of looking more at the big picture of how you're developing the players as people and making sure that they're kind of playing the game right way. I know that, for me in particular, that was always kind of a struggle, I feel like, in the beginning, where, my culture may have been a little bit more, I don't know, volatile is the right word, but I definitely was, very like up and down emotional, living and dying by every week or every game. But even now, as I've gotten, more and more experience with this, I've been able to kind of look more big picture and be a little bit more even keel about things. And I think that that's kind of helped kind of steady things culture wise and kind of kept the players kind of more emotionally level, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know where the quote came from or if it was from
Hmm.
a movie or something like that, but you can visualize the old coach that says the success of this team isn't going to be realized until 15, 20 years down the road when you guys become fathers and careers
Mm.
established and all that stuff. And you kind of laugh about it, but there's so much truth to it, really. And then you really start to see that. And I've had the fortune of being at Rangeview. This is my 22nd year. So, I've got three guys on my staff that played for me, and being able, my son played for me, and being able to kind of stay connected with guys who do become fathers and husbands, and flourish in different parts of their careers, and it makes you feel good that you may be a little part of their success outside of the basketball arena, and it definitely helps with losing a game at the buzzer, or having a long night here or there, staying up. It definitely helps the motivation factor for sure.
Yeah, and so cool for you being there as long as you can, or excuse me, as long as you have to be able to see those players come back and everything, and be able to kind of have them, like you said, on their staff and to come back and they're still involved. I mean, that's one of the, I think, awesome things about those coaches who can be at a position for so long, is not only are they able to work with the guys, but then they're there so long that they can see them become the adults that they do and kind of see them come back and everything like that. It's like you can kind of see the seeds that you help to plant in them in their high school years. You can kind of almost see them flourish and grow into the adults that they become. And I imagine that's just wonderful.
Absolutely.
Coach, as we kind of shift to our topic here about, making all five players playmakers, I like to start with this by kind of talking on the kind of the skill development side here, because we want all of our players on the court. We want them all to be effective. We want them all to be able to make plays, to make shots, to handle the ball, to make decisions. But that does take a big investment in skill development to make sure that your guys have the ability to be able to do those things. So I wanted to kind of start with the skill development side and what goes into the work that you do with your players, you and your staff, in order to build up those, quote unquote, playmaking skills in them.
And these things are not revolutionary. I'm sure a lot of coaches are doing similar things, but a few things that have worked for us, especially when you get into the off season and you really try to focus on skill development and player development, where you're trying to just give opportunities for players to play with some freedom, but yet also expand their games and challenge themselves and try to be the best players they can be, so that when you kind of get closer to the winter season, you get the best team that you can. And so some of the things that we do is, like especially early on when you're doing some off-season things, whether it's open gyms, and in Colorado, we've got the fortune of, we're not really limited with how much time we get to spend with our guys.
Mm,
I know some states you get a certain amount of, practices or face-to-face time
right.
in the off season, but we can be with our guys all the time. We get to have a basketball class at Rangeview, which we've had the last 7 years, which has been great. Or even though it's not a long period of time, I get the attention and I get court time with our kids every day during the school year. So we do things like limiting dribbles early on, which I know you think about. Well, how do you get better at dribbling if you're limiting your dribbles? But it forces ball movement and it forces everybody to touch the ball. So you're not getting guys that go multiple possessions without touching the basketball. So whether you're doing half court stuff and limiting to one or two dribbles, or you're doing full court stuff where you've got three dribbles, it really forces the game to be played at a faster pace. And the kids get surprised with, oh man, I'm learning how to think before I end that third dribble and know what I'm going to do next. And it forces cutting, and it really celebrates the things that keep the ball moving a little bit as well. Another thing that we focus on also is, no matter what kind of a rebounder that you have, we want to start a transition and really build a team with the foundation of what our transition is, and then
Okay.
kind of go from there. So a guy gets a rebound, we encourage him to put the ball on the floor, and you start our break, whether it's a guard or a wing or a big or a post, whatever you want to classify them as, to really give that freedom to really, okay, let's get out and transition. And the best way to do that is for you to initiate it, because guess what? You've got the ball. And really encourage and start things off with that. And I think that's a good place to start. And we have a 5 out or 4 out transition, then we can build our offense from there.
So it sounds like to me, as I kind of hear kind of what your answer is, you're really focused in on I'm just going back to the transition part to start with, like that you're empowering all of your guys that, hey, like you get the ball and you're out there in open space, we're putting the trust in you that you can get this break started. There's not like necessarily in that instance defined rules of like you get the ball, like you have to do this or you need to do this or you need to go fill out a certain area. It's like that trust is in you that you're going to be out there and you're going to be able to be trusted with the ball to go out there and make a decision on the break.
For sure, with freedom. And when you
Hmm.
talk to the guys, and we've tried to seek more feedback from our players over the years as well. And like, how do you want to be coached? Is a
Hmm.
question that we've asked quite a few times. And that word freedom,
Is that it? Yeah.
yeah, they love the word freedom. Like, I want freedom, and sometimes that's scary as a coach. Like, well, okay, I give you a little bit of freedom, but you've got to earn it as well. But especially early on, like when you're establishing what kind of team you want to be, and trying to encourage that kind of development from players, you do want them to be able to play like their coach believes in them, that they can dribble the ball up the floor, that they can make decisions. And the only way to really get better at those things is trial and error, and let's go ahead and do it. And then that does kind of empower kids to make those kind of decisions in transition as well. And I think that's helpful. It's definitely a good step in what you're trying to do.
Well, I think also to kind of add to that, and I'll let you expand on it, I think that that's also maybe like kind of like a conversation also that you have with your guys of like, hey, like if you want a certain level of, freedom, as you mentioned, if freedom is something that you want, with that freedom means that like there's going to be some expectations put on you that if freedom means that like, well, you're not going to be limited if that because the way I hear it is like, okay, if a girl tells me that she wants like freedom, then I say, well, in that case, then that means that you need to be able to do a lot of different things. If you don't want to be constricted necessarily, then that means that your skill set needs to be at a certain point where you are free to be doing, X, Y, and Z. So I think that also maybe goes into, maybe that conversation with your guys of like, well, freedom also means that you need to be really versatile and you need to be able to do a bunch of different things if you, want that freedom necessarily.
Yeah, yeah, prove yourself. Bet on
Hmm.
yourself a little bit. But we've all been to those youth basketball games sometimes that we get a little cringy about, when you hear the youth coach from the sideline, and I'm not disparaging youth coaches. I love youth basketball and youth coaches, but you hear that, get it to a guard. Like, wait a minute, these kids are 9 years old. How do you know who's a guard?
Yeah, already defining
Like,
them. Yeah.
hey, get the rebound and pass the ball to the coach's son so we can start a trans. It's like, let's let everybody just be able to learn how to play basketball, and learn how to play with a little bit of freedom too.
Is there, Coach, in your opinion, is there some sort of like secret or magic to training effective game-like shooters? Is there something that you've found over your years that you really think can maybe unlock a player's, shooting abilities so that they're ready in game situations to make and knock down shots?
It's funny. I think as coaches, we're always trying to steal good shooting drills from other coaches. Like you see a team that shoots the ball well, and I know I've done it many times. Like, hey, coach, what do you do? What do you
Yeah.
do to what does your practice look like? Or can I come to practice, whether it's a high school practice or a college practice, and always trying to, because it's not just shooting, right? It's can you put yourselves in game situations? And we try to make every shooting drill that we do a competition. And so that whether it's you five guys or competing against these five guys, or even you're individually competing against this other guy at your basket, we try to make everything a competition, which when you put a time factor involved with it too, that does kind of encourage them to shoot the ball quickly, which would put you in more of a game type situation, right? We've had a few situations and when you're a really good shooter be wide open, but so often it's you got to work really hard to get those good shooters open, and they get a split second to make that decision or to get that shot up. So we want to kind of simulate that as much as possible in the games, and we want every shot you take to be worth something, right? To put a little, whether it's pressure or competition, however you want to view it. But I think that's something that we try to do every practice. And go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm sure your guys love like competing in that sense too. I'm sure they love like the idea of competing with shooting. It puts that little bit of extra, I don't know if juice is the right word, or kind of like that little bit of extra intensity so that they're not necessarily just going for the motion shooting. There's something on the line, or even if it's just, bragging rights and, some sort of other, consequence for those who loses. I'm sure they can get up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good reason to talk some trash and to compete against your teammate, right? All in good fun. But I think that kind of stuff helps. And I've been to visited some practices, whether it be like a high level college team or even professional teams where they're still practicing not just shooting every day, but like passing and catching the ball and really teaching kids how to be shot ready, what that means with their feet and with their hands and their eyes, and really getting into the details. Because if you're practicing shooting, but if you're not practicing how you might shoot in the game with your shot prep and with your feet and everything that comes with that, then I don't think you're going to ever get to really be a high level shooter in those kind of competitive situations.
And are there things that you've taken from that you kind of incorporate or tell your guys about how to get shot ready?
Oh, for sure. We had our feeder team practice this week on Tuesday, and we were working with our sixth and seventh graders about what that really means. Because so many times they catch the basketball and maybe they travel before they get their shot up, but really breaking it down to taking that one step, establishing your pivot before you catch the basketball, because a lot of kids, they think shot ready, that means, okay, my hands are up, coach. I don't know what else you need me to do. I'm ready to catch the ball.
Mhm.
But being shot ready with your feet. So again, you can get the shot off quickly. And you can also establish momentum and your foundation with that stepping into a shot without traveling. But we talk a lot about the feet. I know we've all kind of looked at Pete Newell and the footwork with the big man camps and different things that have done over the years. But so much footwork can be done on the perimeter with shot prep and passing and different things like that I don't think you can overemphasize good footwork when it comes to any part of basketball, but especially shooting.
Yeah, and it's something that, and I completely agree, it's something that is, at least in my experience, I don't know what yours has been, coach. I think it's something that it takes players a while to get, because I don't know if players are necessarily thinking about it. I think they're thinking about other things in their shot mechanics or getting the ball up and getting shots up. And I don't know if it's something they're consciously thinking about. And I know that, at least in my experience, that when I've talked about, footwork and getting your feet set, I found that, girls I've worked with, that they'll struggle a little bit because then they start to consciously think about it, and they kind of makes them, maybe a little bit hesitant or a little bit slow, because I can almost see them like processing it in their mind. But then once they sort of get that rhythm, once they start get going, then I start to see that improvement or gains. But I just found in my experience they don't really maybe think about it as much until like it's pointed out to them, and a coach spends time working with them on their footwork.
For sure, you want them to do it so many times they don't have to think about it, right?
Yeah,
It's just an instinct. And I, I remember I used to watch some Steve Alford like shooting videos, and if you know Steve Alford
hmm
as a player, that was a long time ago, but he was such a good shooter, and when he became a coach, he really taught shooting to a high level into the details that he would teach kids how to catch it no matter what direction they were going. If you're a right-handed player, you catch it and you're in left right, left right, left right, left right. So as my son was growing up, and my wife was obviously, like many moms of players, they find themselves in the driveway rebounding for their kids, or in
Uh-huh.
the gym watching them get ready. And I said, you be his foot coach, and you make sure that your son and my son's feet are set and ready to go, and he's stepping into those jump shots. So she took it to heart, and I think it helped out. My son turned into a pretty good shooter, and it had
Yeah.
a lot to do with his footwork and consistency.
Yeah, no, no, world of difference for sure. Um, one of the challenges, of course, coach, with, you want to have all five of your players to be, have that playmaking ability and be skilled is, there's only one ball, and they need to be able to work together as a unit. And I'm curious what it is that you like to run on offense. What are kind of your offensive, I guess, go-tos, so to speak, in terms of what you like to run, and how do you kind of get all of your five guys to be ready to make plays within that offensive system that you like?
We've morphed over the years. I can look back at, and I mentioned how we kind of build with transition, and how, maybe 10, 12 years ago, we established things with a side ball screen, and then that kind of generates into our offense, and you're running the pick and roll. And we've kind of grown to the point of, don't teach a kid how to set a ball screen, teach a kid how to read the defense. And maybe a ball screen turns into what we call a top screen, which is like a pick and pop or a ghost screen, or maybe it becomes a slip screen. And we've really tried to focus on giving, going back to that freedom idea of, okay, your job is not to go screen this guy, your job is to go read the defense. And then that also comes back to the ball handler, right? So what if your man's goes under the ball screen? What does that read look like? And what if he goes over the ball screen? Or what if they switch? So we want to empower our kids not just to set a ball screen, but make the 3 or 4 different reads depending on what the defense does, so that you are not easy to guard, that you're hard to guard, and that you always have an option, and you feel confident that no matter what the defense is going to do, I've got a read for it, that we could get a quality productive possession out of it. So we've
hmm
really changed to, whether it's, yeah, okay, this guy's going to come over here and set a ball screen, but it really could be one of 3 different things in that process. And again, you have the freedom to kind of read it and make that play. So that's just kind of one small example of not just focusing on one part of it like screening, but also incorporating, are we cutting, are we coming back off the ball screen, or what are we really trying to get out of this?
In your opinion, how have you kind of helped your players, or what is kind of the secret, I guess, so to speak? I guess we're all looking for that secret of training your players' decision making, of training your players to make reads. Is it something that they just naturally gain with experience or looking at film? Are there ways that coaches, you think, can, deliberately help their players with the decision making process? What in your opinion kind of gets your players, I guess, basketball IQ, so to speak, up to a higher level?
I think a little bit of everything that you mentioned. I do think the film aspect is being able to, whether you're watching yourself, or we've looking at, when we look at our point guards, and we've had them watch film of, like, hey, watch how Chris Paul navigates this ball screen. He's a pretty good player, so maybe we can learn on what his reads are. But also, like most things in basketball, you drill it, right?
hmm
You drill it with kind of dummy defense, or, okay, we're going to do this 10 times when the defender goes over the screen. Okay, now we're going to do this when the defender goes under the screen. And then you kind of build onto that and say, okay, now you have to read it. But don't forget, don't forget about what we just drilled in practice. And so I try to apply it into the competitive situation. And it's amazing. Some guys, you mentioned feel and IQ, like some guys can just pick up things so quickly, and you show them 1 or 2 times and they're those one-time athletes where all of a sudden they just make that play, and other guys need a little more kind of trial and error through the process. But I think it's a collaboration of a lot of things that really help build that IQ and feel.
Mm. And so that's something I wondered also then if that's something that you think can also just be built up for the way that you practice plan, if you can almost intentionally plan situations or put your guys in small sided games or competitive drills where their decision making is being tested and being grown. It sounds like that might be something that you're also incorporating as well, like with what you do in practice.
100%. Like I heard something really good. Like if you want to get better offensively, you make it hard on the offense. And whether there be an extra defender or shrink the court a little bit or limit their dribbles. And if you want to be better defensively, you make it harder on the defense. Whether it be trying to play 3-on-3, we try to do a lot of 3-on-3 stuff that really makes the defense cover a lot of ground and give the offense a lot of space. So they really do have to be good on the ball or in helper in their communication. But those kind of building blocks of 2-on-2, 3-on-3, build up to the 5-on-5, I think is a big help to both those things that you're talking about.
Oh, this is actually going to be a follow-up to my next question, so I'm going to actually hold that thought for a second. But it's kind of alluded to, for players to be, game changers, playmakers, really making an impact on the court. There's only one ball, but of course, there's tons of stuff that guys can do without the ball in their hand to still be just as effective as if they did have a ball in my hand. So, or in their hand rather. So how do you teach your guys or explain to your guys or kind of drill to your guys how to make an impact and what they can do to change the course of a game, regardless of the situation, regardless if they have the ball in their hand or not?
Yeah. Cutting is such a valuable skill, and we've all had players that are just great cutters, right? They have great timing,
Yeah,
or they just have a great energy to it. But and we've also had players that like stop floating around here and make a basket cut. But we talk to our guards specifically about getting their feet wet, which basically means don't just move to move, but cut to the paint and get both feet in the paint when you're making your cuts. And we also talk about cutting to score, not just cutting to move. And if you're cutting to score, I mean, your eyes are on the basketball, your hands are talking to your teammates by where you're going and where you want the basketball, and you're cutting to the rim. And we talk so much about attacking space. We want to attack space and create space. Well, if I'm attacking space, I don't always need the ball to attack space, because if I make a really unselfish basket cut, that might create attention from 2 or 3 defenders, which might create some space for somebody else. And
somebody
that's
else.
why we talk about unselfish cuts, right? Like just cut to an open area and see how the defense reacts. And chances are you might not get a stat in the stat book or the box score, but you're going to do something really helpful for one of your teammates. And, just like anything, whether you're teaching or whether you're coaching, you catch them doing something right and you just praise the heck out of them and celebrate it. And then you hope that it just catches like wildfire with their teammates as well.
Yeah, no, I know. I love that idea of just, spacing in general. And I think that's just such a huge, aspect, especially of where the game is at right now. I can't tell you how many times I've kind of emphasized that with my players about, having space on the court and creating that. And I think that intentional cutting, right? And I think for your players too, as you kind of mentioned, the idea of like cutting intentionally, cut with a purpose, and know that like, hey, that cut that you're making, you got to sell it. You got to be ready for the ball to come your way. But even if it doesn't, if you create enough space for somebody else, that's good enough. And I think for your guys, right, like you said, to know that like them doing that action in creating that space is the right action and something that they're going to be, complimented for and praised for. I think is
For
really
sure.
important, that positive reinforcement, right? As coaches, we need to emphasize and positively reinforce the things that you want them to do on the court. And it sounds like your players definitely value and understand the importance of space on the court.
Some days are better than others, but we
Wow.
we
Yeah.
definitely love it when they do it, right? And that's, back to your point about film too, when you can show them on film, like, look at this great cut and look at what it does to the defense. I think that's really valuable.
Hmm. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned before about screening, and I'm always fascinated. I feel like anytime this gets brought up ever by any guest, I just always pick their brain about it because I'm always trying to get like that much better with teaching my players about screening and how to set like a really good screen that really, frees up someone or creates space like we talked about. So, is there anything, coach, in particular that you emphasize or like to point out or really, uh, you know, instruct your players so that when they're setting a screen, they're setting it well and doing things the right way with it?
It's funny, we were just you mentioned that we had a fall league game tonight, so we were just talking about this as an example with one of our
Okay.
kids, who slipped a screen, right? And it didn't work. And so trying to communicate, okay, why didn't that work? Well, you kind of have to set it up before you slip it. So he never actually had set a screen during the game at all. So why would your defender think that you were going to set a screen if you had never set a screen before?
Yeah, yeah.
And he just kind of slipped it, and he didn't set it up. And so
All
just kind
right.
of that communication piece of like, there's processes to this. And if you set two really good screens, that lets the defense know what you're capable of doing. And then now all of a sudden the door opens up for you to be able to slip it, for you to be able to rescreen and a lot of different things. And again, it kind of goes back to reading the defense, but it also, like you said, you have to set it up first by doing it, the old school way a couple times where you just get a good solid ones, and then now all of a sudden they're putty in your hands, right? And you can take advantage of what they do to react to those good screens.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where as a coach, and we talked about this now a couple of times, like screening is not something that I don't know how much players get excited for it or they get up for it or they get really like amped up to go set a screen for somebody, but when it's done well and as a coach you emphasize it, I think that gets your players that much more like excited about setting it. And I think for me, as I kind of reflect on some of the things that you've talked about, it's kind of made me think about, the things that we encourage our players and the things that we positively reinforce and get really excited about and emphasize that they're doing are going to be the habits that they continue to do. And so to me, it makes me think as a coach, like reflect on what are the things that I value the most and are the most important to me. And am I consistently positively reinforcing those things so that my players know, oh, I should keep doing that? Because when I do, I get more playing time, I get positively reinforced, and like I feel better because I did this thing that my coach is really excited that I'm doing.
Right, right. It's also we've all done it where you pick a couple captains and they pick the teams, right? So
Yeah.
when you make your point guards the captains, who do they pick? Well, I'm going to pick this guy because he set some really good screens for me, man,
Yeah, yeah,
and that
yeah.
really opens the floor up for me. And I remember talking to some of our guards in the past, and just like who sets the best screens. It's always interesting to get their feedback on who they like playing with, and also what we emphasize, and it's really true, is when you set really good screens, you're the one who's going to be open 9 times out of 10. If you set a solid
Yeah.
one and then you do the right roll or pop or whatever it is that you're emphasizing, then it's going to actually end up better for you too.
Yeah, you will get rewarded quite a
Yeah,
lot for
hopefully.
that work. Yeah, no,
Hopefully.
hopefully, yeah, no,
Yeah.
that hopefully is the key word there. Um, I am curious about the defensive end as well, because of course there's playmaking ability that comes on the defensive end, and it'll look a little bit different. It'll be in its own unique form and everything, but are I guess to kind of start with this, what are your kind of like key points that you kind of zero in on and refine with your guys about being a good defender? What are kind of like the core principles that you go over with your guys so that they're ready to make, good defensive stops and make the right play defensively?
Yeah, we try to teach a few principles about, like we all teach closeouts, right? And what do you want to, what's a really good closeout to look like? And are you forcing the ball to the middle of the floor, or are you forcing the ball to the sideline? I know just this past week, Coach Bennett from Virginia retired, and he was always one of my favorite coaches, not just listen to, but also watch his teams, because they could always guard and they played that pack line defense. And that hasn't been something that we've done, but it's always interesting to see kind of the differences. And hopefully people can watch your teams and see, okay, what are they trying to do defensively? Are they trying to keep the ball to the sideline? Are they trying to, switch those ball screens or handoffs? Are they trying to keep the ball in the center of the floor? Are they trying to keep the ball out of the center of the floor? So being able to start with, okay, how are we closing out on the basketball? And then from there, giving them a little bit of freedom and just making sure that, listen, we say protect the paint, but how do we protect the paint? Are you early help or are you late help? And so I think once your guys really know a few of the kind of the unforgiven rules like this, we can make these mistakes, but we can't make these mistakes where you're closing out on the wrong hip or you're late on your help instead of early on your help. So for us, we call them high side closeouts, which keeps the ball off the elbows, out of the middle of the floor, and really force it to the sidelines where we have those extra defenders and help along the baseline. That's where we start defensively. And then obviously, like, it's great to be able to have those principles, but at the end of the day, you need guys who are quick enough, athletic enough, and have a max effort in everything that they do, and then it really falls into place.
And with your answer that you kind of gave, that's to me something that I think is important, that coach kind of emphasizes about, like, all of the defensive philosophy I can give you, or all of like the defensive like hints and cues and everything like that, but just how much of defense is effort based, and how much maximum effort can make up for a lot of things, and hustle and intensity and things like that. And I think that for maybe coaches who are kind of like thinking about, man, like I really want to, have a lockdown defense, and I really want to have, guys or girls that are going to really shut the other team down. I think just emphasizing those things that don't necessarily take a lot of basketball skill, like, can make up maybe for a lot of, maybe defensive knowledge that they lack, or basketball knowledge they lack, can be made up for just by emphasizing just how important it is to work hard and give maximum effort, like you said.
Sure, absolutely, 100%.
So one of the things that I wanted to then pick your brain about, Coach, is I know that you've had the fortunate opportunity, and it's great to know that you've helped send a lot of guys to play at the next level. And of course, guys who are going to be playing at the next level, they're looking for guys that are going to make a difference for their program. Colleges are looking for guys who are going to know help out, make an immediate impact, and be playmakers in their own way. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain about with that, what in general, because I know it's a very general term, what do you see as colleges are kind of looking for in players when they're looking for guys to recruit from your school? What are sort of the things that they're looking at or looking for in a guy?
That's a great question. And the easy answer is they're looking for those 6'8" athletic, elbow above the rim. And we have been blessed with a lot of really good players. We've had 10 guys been able to play Division I basketball. And that I'm not taking credit for, right? But I do think there's some things that over the years that we've been able to help our guys through the process. And I love those guys that have gone on to play at the Colorado States, and we've got a kid playing at Wyoming right now, and that's great. And I love watching them and kind of being a fan of their careers. And we've had some kids go play overseas, and that's great as well. But I really love those stories where they go to a junior college and they really earn their way, and then get an opportunity, or maybe a kid that was a walk-on that just kind of found his way onto the floor, and then
Hmm.
figured out how not to be taken off it, right? And we've had both of those experiences as well. And I think that when you do have guys that can just make quick decisions, and we try to emphasize that as high school players, and then when they do get to the college level, outside of the obvious physical attributes that help you compete at the college level, when you've got high IQ guys that are okay with being coached and really want to be coached and can just make quick decisions. And no matter what kind of offense that you're running, if you can get guys that can make quick, productive decisions, like the right quick decisions, it's going to really put them in a good situation and opportunities to be used and utilized by those coaches. But it starts with we got to have the talent first, right? And then we have had the opportunity where you can look back at some of our kids who've kind of paved the way for others by building a reputation, where we have had guys come out of our program and gradually be successful in other programs. We had a young man that didn't have any scholarship offers and went to University of Northern Colorado as a walk-on, and was a redshirt walk-on, and then his second year got to start. About 2 weeks into the season, they were playing at University of Texas, and I had no idea he was starting. And all of a sudden, I'm watching the game, and he's on TV.
Wait a minute, I know that.
Yeah,
I know
I
that.
know that kid. I thought he was a redshirt walk-on, and then all of a sudden, he gets that chance to start. And he never relinquishes his starting job for the next 4 years. And to be able to bring a kid like that back, his name is Matthew Johnson, and he's playing in Sweden right now. But to be able to bring a kid like that back into the gym and talk to our guys about, listen, this is the level of commitment that it really takes. And this is what being a college basketball player looks like. And it's not for everyone. And we've had kids who are really successful high school players that have decided not to play college basketball. But we feel like we give them a good taste of what the commitment level is and what the sacrifice is to be college players, so that they have an idea about what they're kind of getting into as well. And is really something that you want to pursue. And if it is, this is what it's going to take, and whether that be the effort in the weight room or the effort at the training table or whatever that might be. We've been blessed. I mentioned we've got guys on our staff that played for me, that had played college athletics, and we just love it when our alumni come back in the gym and be able to be mentors to our younger kids. That's a real blessing.
Well, it sounds to me, Coach, that that's like a really important conversation that your players need to hear, because I'm sure you have, as many of us coaches do, players who talk about wanting to play at the next level, but to understand what that needs to look like and what they need to do, and the fact that what they're going to need to do is going to probably be far different than what their teammates are doing. And if they're really willing to make that commitment, I think is going to be something that they have to hear. And as you mentioned, it won't necessarily be for everyone, but for the ones who it is going to be for them to know, like, okay, like, this is what I really want to do. This is going to be the path I need to go on, or the plan I need to put in place. Like, I'm sure it's invaluable for them to actually have some sort of a blueprint or framework that they can sort of kind of make their own like plan out of.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so with that, I guess I'm curious, it was kind of a follow-up question. Is that something that has been, in your experience, tricky at all to navigate, where maybe you have a guy or so who's like on this path because they're looking to play collegiately, and they, you got to, put certain, I don't know if expectations is the right word, but they're on a different sort of plan individually in terms of what they need to do versus what everyone else may have to do, who's, they're going to hold them to high standards, but they might not necessarily have college aspirations. Is that anything that's been difficult to, or tricky to navigate, when you have one person who's trying to go on a certain path and train at a certain level to get somewhere, and maybe when there's other guys or their teammates who aren't necessarily training for that sort of thing?
I think having those kind of honest and open conversations. Well, we sit down with not just our seniors, but you sit down with your seniors and talk about, okay, this is what the recruitment looks like for seniors. But then you'd also talk to them as juniors and sophomores about what is normal and what kind of things look like, and what level recruits seniors versus juniors, and being able to have those open conversations. But you got to ask them, right? Like, what do you want your college career to look like? Do you want to play? Do you not want to play? And I think just being okay with the kid who's like, I just want to play high school basketball, and then I want to go to school and study engineering, and like just being like, that's great, and that's not going to deter you at all from having a great experience at the high school level. Let me help you, you just have a great time here, and then it helps me also as a coach to be able to know, okay, who should I be reaching out to for this kid because he wants to play at this level. And you do have some of those conversations as well of, listen, this is how I view you, and it's a little different how you view yourself. But let's just be open and honest. These are my experiences with players that have a similar, achievement level that you've had, and this is the path that they've taken. But our goal as a program is, if you make it through our program and you're a senior who's graduated, and whether it's been, played varsity for 1 year or varsity for 4 years, we want to give you at least an option to go pursue college basketball, whether that be at a junior college or a Division I school. So if that's the goal, is we got to prepare everybody for that, which means academically you're prepared for it, physically, and from a basketball understanding and skill level, you're prepared for it. So there's so many opportunities out there to play basketball after high school that we want to just give them the knowledge and the opportunities to pursue if they want to do it.
And something that's really vital in that you talked about is like having that conversation, because think sometimes, and I think I'm guilty of this too, where I've kind of maybe assumed or maybe, thought about what my players' intentions were, what they want to do, or, oh, of course you want to play college, basketball. Who wouldn't want to play college basketball? But, having those conversations about, is that something you really do want to do, or are you just happy with being done at high school? I think that, unless you talk to your guys or your girls, you don't want to like put them in an awkward position where you're having, coaches look at them or be like, oh yeah, this player would be a great fit for your program, and then the player's like, but I don't want to play in college. That would be kind of a bit of an awkward conversation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I went through that with my own son, who was a
Did
really
you?
successful high school player. He was first team All State in high school and set a lot of records playing for me, and it was such a treat to coach him. And so I just kind of assumed he wanted to play in college, right? Because you're good in high school. And I remember him having the conversation with me, like, Dad, I don't know if I want to play in college. And so I'm having all my former players like reach out to him, and I remember having a conversation. I said, "Oh, did you talk to my son about playing at college?" And he said, "Yeah, I told him not to do it." I said, "Wait a minute, why did you do that?" He said, "Well, if his heart's really not 100% in it, and if he doesn't really know it's something that he really wants to do, he shouldn't do it, because what you're committing to, you have to be both feet all in and 100% committed to what they want you to do and who they want you to be." So I kind of learned a
Mhm.
lot through that experience, and I think it's helped me be kind of an open, honest, and accepting coach to whatever kids want to do after they graduate.
No, definitely. No, that's I appreciate you sharing that. A couple more quick things, Coach, before we wrap up, that I was kind of thinking about during our conversation is, and I know some of our listeners might be in this sort of situation where, they have a guy or they have a girl who's got really good playmaking ability. They have a lot of talent, and at some point you kind of want to get them in that mentality of like, hey, you're a great player. You need to go out there and be trusted to, make plays. Like, I'm gonna put the ball in your hand, and you're gonna get out there and you're gonna, make a play for us, or you're gonna take over. You're the best player on the court. Go out and, do make something happen because you're just that talented. Are there conversations like that where you talk to your guys and you kind of say like, hey, this is a great matchup for you. You got to look to, really be, assertive and go after it. And I'm always curious about how that kind of works when you're preaching, team concepts and you want your team to work really well, but then you also know that maybe you have a player who, is particularly special or is in a particularly good, situation where that game where they need to maybe be a little bit more selfish or, look for their, opportunity more. I would just be curious about how you would kind of handle maybe those situations when you have that player who has that, exceptional talent where they can, take over a game by themselves, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And I do think those kind of individual conversations are really valuable about listen, and I think those questions that you ask kids, maybe you sit down with a really good player and you say, what's a good stat line look like for you? Like for you to think that you played well, what's a good stat line look like? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm a math teacher, so I probably dive into the statistics of a game or even a practice. Sometimes we stat practices, and so I might look at that a little deeper than other coaches. But I do think it's a great kind of tool to talk to your players about. Like, you put up 17 shots, but you had 2 assists. Is that the direction that you think is good, or like you
Mm.
said, you're a great shooter, but you shot 2 times in the first quarter? Like, should you be more aggressive early, or what should it really look like for you? And there's so many different analytic things that you can kind of dive into, probably too many things, especially at the high school level, where you can pay too much attention to. But I do think it's a good kind of starting point to have those conversations of like, well, I want you to lead our team in scoring. And if that's going to be the case, if you got a great shooter that passes up an open look, you tell them, well, listen, if you don't shoot it, somebody else will. And I'd rather you take that shot than maybe somebody else. And sometimes it's good to have those conversations in front of their teammates, right? Like, listen, I'm
Mm-hmm.
the coach here and I want Johnny to shoot more. And this is why, because this is what he shot on the shooting machine last week. And this is what he shoots in games. And this is what happens when he does take 5 or 6 of these threes a game. And it's just kind of have those honest conversations, not just with the individual, but with your team, and be able to allow them to give some feedback on maybe why they're not being as aggressive as you'd like them to be, or just give them that freedom to be able to open their minds a little bit about what you want them to do.
I think that's really cool though that this kind of activated something in my brain about looking at stat lines. I think for coaches that might be something really cool to kind of think about is like if you have like five really talented players who have the ability to make plays and they can do certain things, like what should their stat lines potentially look like? What do you kind of look at as like an ideal situation for what you're looking at on a stat line? And I think that that's a good reflection tool as to kind of what you're kind of looking for each of your players, like how many points or shots attempts, maybe not points but shot attempts or assists, or how many turnovers are you looking for. So I guess then naturally that would lead me to asking you, coach, like are when you're statting things or where you're charting things, are there things that you in particular are kind of looking for? Are there things that you can kind of see right away, whether it's like individual or team wise, that you're like, oh, okay, this is, a really good sign. This is like a maybe not so good sign. What kind of goes into that process of kind of identifying, good stat lines, so to speak?
Yeah, there's definitely, we try to find those kind of stats that are not really minutes induced, like
Yeah.
how can you impact the game if you played for 5 minutes? Like what kind of stats, whether you played for 5 minutes or 25 minutes, are valuable stats. And obviously, the plus minus piece is a really valuable thing to see. Like you could be impactful in the game even if you don't score because of all the other things that we've talked about, right? The cutting, the IQ stuff, just the making good defensive plays. Like, so we look at plus minus quite a bit. There's a stat that we use Huddle, and I know a lot of coaches do that, but there's a stat that they call VPS, or a value point system, which basically takes all the positive things that they're doing, whether it's scoring, assists, steals, defense, or offense, and you divide it by all the negative things. And by negative, you mean like a missed shot or a turnover or a foul.
Mm-hmm.
So we can look at that stat and whether you played 5 minutes or 25 and say, listen, you've got a 2.0 value system, which basically means you're doing twice as many good things on the court as you are negative things. And that might not always be scoring or might not always be rebounding, but it's enough where you can really kind of celebrate the successes of players individually. And you don't want it all to be about scoring, even though you want some guys to score or look to score more than others.
Right.
But there are a lot of kind of those little detail things that you can. And sometimes stats don't tell everything. Like, well, maybe my plus minus is because you put me in the second unit. We don't have a very good second unit, coach. But
Mm.
it does give you enough to, at least, like you said, have the conversation with guys and allow them to kind of look into the stats as well, so that they can tell you what's happening good during the games.
Well, it's kind of like you said, right? Being a math teacher that you are, like you want your players to be able to interpret what these numbers mean and what looks good for
Right.
them and what they should be, maybe looking at and judging their success criteria on. I think it's one thing, obviously, for us as coaches to do it, but for players to be able to look at it and be able to make conclusions based on that numbers, I think that almost sounds like a math or statistician person's dream, so to speak.
Yeah, I think my kids should really get math credit for playing for me,
Yeah,
because we do more than they would like sometimes, so
yeah,
diving into those stats.
data-driven decisions. No,
Yeah,
I
right.
love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as a great coach, man, this hour flew by, but it was so fun to kind of pick your brain on this topic. And I wanted to kind of wrap up, coach, with a couple questions that I ask every guest, which is, first off, thinking back on your coaching career, and I know there's been a lot of moments in your coaching career, but is there a moment in particular that you could share that you think by sharing it, our listeners would be able to learn from?
Yeah, I do think, and I don't want to make this a negative thing, but there was my very first year, I had to make a really difficult decision to uh, remove a player from our team. And it was really hard, kind of a gut-wrenching thing. And it was just, there were a few issues that were going on, and I knew it wasn't the best decision for that player in the short term. But I knew it was the best decision for our team and our program in the short term. And I felt also that it was the best decision for that player in the long term. So that was a really, really difficult thing. And people were telling me that I did the right thing. Um, but I just did it and kind of lived with it. But in the back of my mind, I never quite knew, like, that individual ended up going on and playing in college, but he had some struggles at that level with some of the same issues that he had as a high school athlete. But then I actually ran into him probably 15 years after he graduated. He happened to be at one of our games, and we were actually out of state, and he was living out of state. And we had just a great moment in conversation where he said, what you did was the best thing you could have done for me, because I was this, and that when I was in high school, and I needed to kind of get my eyes opened. And so I would just say, those really difficult, hard decisions that you make for the betterment of the program, with the betterment of everyone. It doesn't always turn out like that, where you see the benefit of it right away
Mhm.
or in a few years. But I definitely, that was very helpful to me early on in my coaching career, to be able to experience that, even though it wasn't a lot of fun.
And how reassuring, how great it is to know how well that kid is doing and
Yeah,
how much that decision positively benefited him. I imagine how great of a relief that must have been to have
yeah,
that
it
conversation.
was.
No, that's fantastic. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest kind of what I call a 60-second soapbox. You're welcome to go over 60 seconds. I'm certainly not going to time you, but I like to use this as kind of a platform for you to kind of get out a final idea, a closing message, something that you just want to leave the listeners with. Feel free to take it any direction, basketball or coaching wise, that you wish. Coach, I'm just going to kind of open up the floor here and let you take it from here.
Oh, I appreciate that, and thanks again for spending time with me and asking
Mhm.
me questions to kind of challenge me and my thinking. I think it's always helpful, and I just enjoy talking basketball too. But I think I would say, you asked me earlier how I think things have changed, and I think we can both agree that one of the things that basketball and athletics is a little different now, whether you're talking about the youth level, the high school level, or college level, is you get kids that are switching schools, switching club teams, switching colleges. We talk about the transfer portal and everything that comes along with that. And by all means, there's legitimate reasons why kids would change programs or change schools. And I don't mean to disparage those reasons, but I do think, and I've had this thought kind of in my mind over the last year or so, and I think as coaches, the best thing that we can provide our players is competition, and we want to kind of foster athletes who seek competition, not run away from it, right? And so sometimes you get maybe a middle schooler that looks at some high school programs and think, well, where can I get on the floor? Where can the quickest path for me to get on the floor or play be? But I think it's really more about, not about playing time, but how can you seek competition? I mean, we, as high school coaches in Colorado, we get about 25 games, but if you're practicing 25 times during the season, that means you got to, or excuse me, if you're playing 25 games during the season, that means you've got 100 to 125 practices, right? And where are you really going to grow from? Are you going to grow from the games, or are you going to grow from that competition that you have in practice every day? So I just want to encourage athletes and coaches to continue to seek and provide that competition to make these kids the best that they can be.
Love it. No, I think that's a phenomenal point to end on, Coach. Appreciate that. And Coach, appreciate you coming on here and talking about your experience and your different strategies of getting guys involved, making guys playmakers and whatever their role is, and talking about offense, defense, and practices and all the other great stuff that we touched on, and that definitely flew by. So Coach Palmer, man, really appreciate it. Good luck as you're going here for another year and getting after it here for another season. Appreciate you coming on and spending some time to talking to us, and best of luck going forward, Coach. Really do appreciate it.
Loved it. Thanks, Coach Hernandez, and good luck to you too.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.